That's the deal. Right, Rita?
All right. Can you hear us, Rita?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Good.
And this is my boss.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Oh,
you see?
yeah.
So she just passes it on down, and we all get these lovely white scarves.
Right.
Off we go.
Yes.
Beautiful. Thank you. Are you at home, Rita?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon. We'll be up in the valley soon.
We're coming up tomorrow or the next day.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, Marlene, where are you?
I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco.
Ah, sweet.
All right. I'm a Santa Cruiser, so I know that part of the world.
So it's, what time is it? It's
It's
2:04.
2:04, and we don't know who's going to come, if anyone else. We are
Oh,
recording.
good. Here comes somebody.
Jennifer McMurray.
All right. And so we'll get started soon. We'll wait like 5 more minutes.
Because we want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to undertake. This is a 2-hour session. And as we're in the education, inspiration, and learning convergence
wait.
room, right?
Yeah, let's start. Let's let a
Okay.
few people come, because here comes a
There's
few
our
people.
bonds.
Yeah. So we'll just wait for a few minutes, and then we'll get started. Let's start at, what time is it? 2:05.
Want to start at 2:10?
We could.
Actually, if anybody wants to engage at this stage and just, why, for example, why are people joining us here? What's up with that? And then we'll explain what we're going to do, and then we'll proceed.
All right. So we just start? Doesn't look like. Should we just start?
We could start.
Okay, because we're going to record it and then we're going to use it elsewhere. So this is important that we do it well and do it right for the recording.
And I
You
think
probably know how that works, Marlene.
I think it goes out on, right now, I think it's going out on Facebook Live as well.
I doubt it,
You
because
doubt
they've
it?
got the main
Oh, is that
stage.
just the main
There's
stage?
a bunch of stages.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get started.
All right. So we are recording.
Okay.
And what else do I need to do? We're going to be sharing a screen, but that's in a little while.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you going to have your glasses on?
It helps to read this fine print.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Here
Okay,
we go.
Here we go.
Okay. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the third great synthesis, the role of the United States of America in the evolution of consciousness. So we're big picture thinkers, and we're going to take you on a ride through the big picture of the evolution of consciousness and the role of the United States and the early settlers of New England and the Native Americans they lived amongst, all the way up through the evolution of consciousness, the evolutionary leap we're about to take now with this World Unity Week coming together of Indigenous and all other peoples of the world during this amazing post-pandemic time that's bringing humanity into our hearts for a new future. And I'm Connie Baxter Marlowe.
I'm Andrew Cameron Bailey, and I'd like Connie to explain to us what she means by the third grade synthesis, because I've known this young lady for a while, 17 years, and she's been talking about the first grade synthesis, the second grade synthesis, we're all back in history, and the third grade synthesis. And if I'm not mistaken, right this week in World Unity Week, with the beautiful, extraordinary global Indigenous contribution that's been coming in and coming in and coming in so powerfully. Good heavens. Do you mean the third grade synthesis has begun?
It has begun. I've been seeing it for decades. I saw it 30 years ago. I expected it 30 years ago because I came to understand that what's next in the evolution of consciousness is that we come to understand what the indigenous peoples know about the nature of the universe. So that led to my lifelong commitment to bringing indigenous cosmology into the mainstream. And I've been doing it diligently for 30 years. And Rita, who's here with us, can attest to that fact. In the Roaring Fork Valley, in Aspen, I was rattling a lot of cages and saying, hey, guess what? we've got to listen up to these visionary native elders that I was bringing into that valley back in the 90s, because I saw something through them and their way of life that I resonated to, my heart resonated to, and I saw as the true nature of the universe. And so that's my answer.
That's a good answer. Why don't you hold up that book?
So
We're in Colorado, and a lot of people globally have possibly heard the word Kokopelli, but not everybody knows who Kokopelli is or was. May be purely a mythical figure or may have actually been a human being. Don't know the answer to that. But the cover of our book, The Trust Frequency, has this equation on it. Kokopelli equals MC squared. Now that's kind of funny and fun. And it reminds us of Uncle Albert. What's his name again? Good old Uncle Albert Einstein. But it's the new math. It is the equivalence of indigenous cosmology and quantum science. The fact that, and not to exclude the ancient rishis in India 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, saying exactly the same things as the indigenous people who have not forgotten are saying now, and as we, the Westerners, are learning now through science. Science has reached an extraordinary place. So Kokopelli equals MC squared to me. And I came up with this crazy idea, so you know who to call. Kokopelli represents indigenous wisdom, the indigenous worldview. And MC squared represents science. So I'm really proposing that there's a perfect balance between those two, between indigenous cosmology or native wisdom, however you want to think of that, and the entire field of science. They're both critical, they're both important, they're both beautiful, and they mesh together absolutely beautifully.
especially now with unified physics and Nassim Haramein and resonance science and Marshall Lefferts with his harmonics and Jude Currivan with her whole world view. We're on the leading edge of science truly integrating the two. And what our book does, The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm, is it's a synthesis of the two that creates something new that's neither science or indigenous cosmology, but it's a construct on the nature of the universe that lets us know we live in a conscious, loving, abundant universe. And we're going to get into that later. But now what we want to do is go into the history of the United States, because the founding story of the United States has always been out of balance, because that did not bring in the role of the Native Americans into the story beyond the first Thanksgiving 3-day celebration and Squanto teaching them how to plant corn. So we're going to go into that story, the first great synthesis in Plymouth, the second great synthesis, because there was 54 years of peace and friendship in Plymouth. So that's when that synthesis occurred. The second great synthesis being when the great law of the Iroquois, aspects of it, came into the Constitution of the United States. And now we're looking forward to the third great synthesis that's happening now. So let's go on now that we've given a bit of an introduction. And one thing I would say about the quantum science, indigenous cosmology synthesis and coming together is when I was experiencing those Native American elders, the visionary elders who came into my life that showed me the missing pieces of the paradigm I was looking for. Someone said to me, "Have you read The Holographic Universe?" Well, 3 people said it to me. The third person put it in my hands, and I actually read it. And that's when I discovered that quantum science explains what Wallace Black Elk, whom you'll meet later in this discussion and presentation, was talking about, what his reality was as a shamanic elder who spoke the universal language, is how he called it. So that was my introduction to the quantum science Indigenous cosmology equation. And what was yours, Andrew?
So mine came from exactly 180 degrees opposite in terms of the sequence of events. So Connie's came from a book called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, and which explained to Connie what these native elders were saying. And she saw the resonance between those two views of reality. They're two completely different views on the same reality. And when you've really grokked, I love that word, when you've really understood both of those, there's an integration that occurs, and one gets an intuitive sense of this extraordinary universe we live in. I, on the other hand, I'm a science guy, and I did 7 years of university. I grew up in South Africa in the British system, so it was Oxford and Cambridge and those kinds of academic institutions. And during that education, I was primarily involved in mathematics and chemistry, and secondarily with physics. I have to say, I never had a wonderful, inspiring physics teacher. I just didn't. I had inspiring math teachers, inspiring chemistry teachers, and not the physics. So I sort of had a glimpse of quantum science. I knew a little bit about Schrodinger and Einstein and Niels Bohr and all those guys. But honestly, I didn't get it. I simply did not get it. And I honestly don't think my teachers got it. However, once I was graduated and out of that educational learning phase, I began to teach college. I was teaching college, and I was teaching chemistry and mathematics mostly, and nothing to do with physics. Physics had sort of fallen away. And I realized that I was actually more interested in humans, in human beings, and how humans understood the universe. And I was interested in spiritual matters. I was introduced to Buddhism very early on at the age of 14. And all of that became a sort of much more important interest to me than the science that I was teaching in college. So I took a course in social anthropology with a focus on comparative religion. And in there somewhere in the middle of that degree, I discovered the Australian Aborigines because I was studying Indigenous people's understanding of the nature of the universe. And in this big fat book called A Reader in Comparative Religion, it weighs about 20 pounds, was a treatise or a thesis on the Australian Aborigines and their concept of the dream time and the entire worldview that ancient people has kept to this day. I'm sure they've lost a lot of it, but an extraordinary vision. And as I was reading this and realized it was interpreted through an English anthropologist, so it really wasn't the real thing, but I got it. All of a sudden I went, wait a minute. These guys are speaking pure poetic quantum physics. Excuse me, that was a wake-up moment. That was how I got to it.
So those are fun stories. And so one thing now that as we move forward, one thing we want to say is there are many perspectives on history. And we have a certain perspective that we're going to share with you. We take the high road. All cultures, all races, all people have a light and a shadow. And until we recognize that and we stop demonizing one race over another and lifting one race above another, we are not going to come into our hearts and move forward together. And what we need is an even playing field to acknowledge the shadow and the light of every race, every culture. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge the fact that there are many perspectives. It depends on your point of view, how you look at history. So we take the high road. We look at the light that everyone has brought to this party and has yet to bring. And I think that's so important right now in this time on the planet, that we stop demonizing and looking at the shadow pieces and we say, okay, what's the light in the heart of those people who are doing things that we call bad and wrong and horrible. Okay, there has to be a light inside of them too. Okay, so there's always a reason for everything, and I believe that we have been responding to a lower frequency on the planet, that the planet has been sitting in a lower frequency of fear, scarcity, and separation. And we've actually had a job to do to process those aspects of universal love, of universal unconditional love. That's our job as a human species in the 3D physical form. So everything that's happened to date has been for a purpose. And this is the essence of Indigenous cosmology. Everything has a purpose. It's serving a higher purpose. And if we take that as absolutely true, then we know that something wonderful is coming on the planet, that we are serving the coming of what I believe is heaven on earth, peace on earth. Okay, so that's what we're focusing on. And so we will proceed now with our story, our perspective on the founding of the United States and the evolution of consciousness. So we're going to share a screen, and we're going to, what?
I'd just like to say one brief thing.
Yes.
So we're going to be specifically focusing on something that happened exactly 400 years ago this year, the arrival of the Mayflower, the first permanent long-term English settlement that actually succeeded in New England in Massachusetts Bay back in 1620, 400 years ago. And I've done a lot of work on the subject. Here's a book I wrote on the subject. It's called The Mayflower Revelations. It's actually a historical mystery novel.
Available on Amazon, The Mayflower Revelations.
As you can imagine, a book of 677 pages took an awful lot of research. I learned a lot. Now, I'm an Englishman who grew up in South Africa, and I came to this country and ended up with a Mayflower descendant named Connie Baxter Marlowe, whose 12 times great-grandparents were America's first couple. Who was it? Longfellow wrote the poem, right?
Longfellow wrote the poem of his ancestors. So I'm related to Longfellow, John Alden and Priscilla Mullins.
So this is something that I have learned, that in New England there's a fair amount of attention placed on these things, but most of the way, the further west you go, the less information there is, the less knowledge there is, and the more misinformation and misbelief there is. So I became kind of passionately involved in researching that whole story, that origin story. And I learned to my surprise that there was more than half a century of peace and friendship between the Native Americans and those English settlers. It lasted from 1621, when they first met the Indians, to 1675. There was a 54-year period of peace and friendship during which the two cultures interacted and meshed and into something that Connie calls the first great synthesis. So we're going to start there, and we're going to pretty much stay in the New England story, because the New England story then goes 150 years into the future, with the Iroquois Confederacy contributing in a significant way to the actual American Constitution. The way this country is structured to this day has some roots in Native American. And then we're going to fast forward to the present and investigate this idea of a coming together in this time. So that's the overview of what I just want everybody to sort of have a picture of. This is going to be going, starting back then 400 years ago and proceeding right into 2020.
And I'll say that what I saw from my experience with the Native Americans, the visionary Native Americans, the essence of, excuse me, their way of life, I saw in the Mayflower Pilgrims a spiritual alignment. And what I set about was to bring that spiritual alignment forth. And Andrew, I enlisted Andrew in this process because he is a researcher. He I read one sentence in the book that Spirit tells me to read. He reads the whole book and retains it. So he did an enormous amount of research and wrote this novel. He's a writer, and he actually wrote the trust frequency book as well. And he also came up with some very interesting, unique hypotheses that we'll share briefly today. But what I saw was the spiritual alignment of these people. And so Andrew and I came together and we went over to England and we walked the Pilgrim Trail to find out who these people really were. Okay, what their intent was. Who were these people? Because I don't open my mouth until I've done research and really know what I'm talking about as far as this perspective that we're going to share. And we discovered these extraordinary people who took an extraordinary step for humanity when they stood up to the King of England and put their lives on the line. So we will proceed and share a bit of that. We're going to run through it pretty quickly because we've got a lot to share. But I just wanted to preface it with that understanding that these people were impeccable in their belief that they were being spirit guided. I live a spirit guided life. I don't know how many of you do, but I expect a lot of you do. And when we take our direction from the divine, we recognize it in others, and I could see it in these Mayflower pilgrims. It's not because they were my ancestors, because my ancestors weren't actually the radical separatists. My ancestors were on the Mayflower, but they were not radical separatists. And so this isn't about my ancestors. This is about the human race and the steps that have been taken, the courageous steps that have been taken for the evolution of consciousness. And those steps are being taken right now in the world by the people who are standing up for racial justice, for freedom, for equality, for justice, for climate. So there are times in history when there's leaps are taken, and we're going to share what we believe have been some leaps because of an involvement with Indigenous people and Indigenous cosmology, which ultimately is our essence of all people. They have simply been carrying a connection to an expanded universe and the sacredness and oneness of all life for all of us, for us to awaken to. And that's what's happening now with this World Unity Week, with the good of the whole connection field that we're involved in, that's on Zoom, that the pandemic has paved the way for and created with this Zoom technology, that we can be face to face and heart to heart all over the world. It's so exciting. So we'll get on with our little, what do you call it? Song and dance, dog and pony show. Because we've got some really important information to impart and some inspiration and some elders that we have video of to share some perspectives. So come along on our journey with us.
And I'd like to welcome Tara Brown, whose smiling face has arrived in the Zoom room. So welcome, Tara. So we're going to share our screen in a moment, as soon as I can figure it out. Everything seems to be going well. Share screen, here we go. So and we go here, I do believe. And you're mixing, you know, oh my goodness.
And then we go over here to...
What do we do now?
To pull it over a little bit. Pull it over, pull it over, pull it over.
Pull the screen up?
Yeah, there. Now start from start. Push from start.
I want to start from scratch. Where's start?
Start here.
That?
Yeah.
Good. I can't even read it. Okay.
Okay.
Here we are.
So here we are. This is our first introductory screen. And so we'll move. So what we're speaking about is the third great synthesis. Let's move that down.
No.
So we're talking about the third great synthesis, the role of the United States in the evolution of consciousness. And so what we will do is, I hope.
I think we are technically happening. Is it changing now?
No.
It's not changing. Ooh.
Why isn't it? You've got it. Maybe you've got that over something.
I think, okay.
So hold on. Hold
Bear with
everything.
us. We'll figure it out.
Hmm.
No.
What's going on? Maybe, no, it's because you clicked on that. Okay. All right. So let's move this down here. Okay, folks. The third great synthesis. When we come together as equals, as family, and we each open our hearts and our minds to the other, the melding of our gifts will bring a new perspective that is invisible at this time. This new perspective will allow us to see the path to true unity, peace, and freedom.
And when did you first write that?
I wrote that in the mid-90s, and it's very real to me, and it's just so exciting to see it and feel it and be a part of it with all you folks right here, right now, that we come together in our hearts and our minds with all four colors of man, and we bring something on the planet that's never been here. It's so exciting. So thank you for being here with us and for listening to this and taking it in and learning from it and walking on the high road with us. So
It's still misbehaving.
let's see. So here's the Hopi prophecy.
When birds fall from the sky and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto the earth from many colors, classes, and creeds, who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow.
So that must be us. So what we are going to walk you through is the move from monarchy to democracy. Okay, in England, in the early 1600s, there was a movement. There was a Puritan movement that had to do with purifying the Church of England. Well, there were pastors and others in the Church of England who realized that they could not purify the Church of England. They had to separate from it. Well, this was a treasonous act because it was an absolute monarchy and the church and state were one, and if you didn't go to the Church of England, you were committing treason. So this put these folks in a very dicey situation, and they were ultimately harried out of the land. The king said, I will harry them out of the land. Well,
that
it
was King James the First.
That was King James the First.
Mm-hmm.
And so these separatists who had met in Scrooby, England, and signed a covenant to each other and to the divine, and we will read that covenant in a minute, that was an agreement with God, okay, that they had work to do. And so in 1609, they escaped from the English monarchy. They arrived in Holland, where they spent 12 years as lecturers at the Leiden University as tradesmen. The guild system would only let them be tradesmen, and some of their educated ones were these lecturers, but they were restricted.
By the way, their leaders were actually Cambridge academics. They were not an ignorant group of people. They were of the highest level of education at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. In 1620, they left Holland for America because they didn't want their kids becoming Dutch. There was a treaty with Spain that was going to perhaps bring Catholicism back into the Netherlands, and they thought it was time to get going. So they did. And they had a vision of a society based on the freedom of conscience, that we could operate in society from our higher consciousness, from our highest direct connection to the divine. And I believe that's where we're headed. That's what's up for humanity now. That's what we're accessing as we open our hearts. And in 1621, they connected with Massasoit, who was the great sachem of the Wampanoag Indians, the Pokanoket Wampanoag Indians, and a creator-based spirituality. Okay, so there was this epiphany-based connection to God spirituality and this creator-based spirituality. So here's the Scrooby Covenant.
Like me to read it?
Yeah.
As ye Lord's free people joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in ye fellowship of ye gospel, to walk in all his ways made known or to be made known to them, according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them. The Scrooby Covenant, 1606.
So this was a covenant to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known. This is a very important point, that they did not feel they knew everything. That's why they were open to the Native Americans. That's why they were open to others. So this covenant, which a covenant was a very important aspect of their social agreements. So here you go. And the Lord assisting them, knowing that they were in alignment with, and that they better stay in alignment with the divine if they wanted the Lord's assistance. So here we have the birth of the American mind, the first great synthesis. So
4 pictures which tell an entire history. The first one being the signing of the Mayflower Compact in November, I think it was November 11th of 1620, in the cabin of the Mayflower before they set foot on American soil. It is widely regarded as the first real document of democracy. It's about a group
from the
of
Europeans.
people, from the European standpoint, right? A group of people about to start a community or about to plant a colony, I guess they called it a plantation, Plymouth Plantation, and actually confronting the question of governance. How are we going to govern ourselves? The one thing they knew, they still regarded themselves as faithful English people. They were not leaving the king behind. They were still they were subjects of King James, but they knew that they were going to have to figure it out themselves. And they actually created the seeds of American democracy, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And they didn't know they were creating democracy, but they knew what they had to do. And we will share that in a moment. And then they, in 1621, in March of 1621, after the first winter, they met with their first Indian, their first Native American. And
a lot of people think that the Indians were there waiting on the shoreline to greet them. They were not. They landed on a desolate, empty coastline, and on the 16th of December, 1620, and met their first Native American on March 16th of 1621.
Yeah, and at that meeting, that first meeting, they signed a treaty, a mutual protection treaty, and which lasted until 1675, when the Native Americans declared war on the Pilgrims and the settlers. But what we want to say is that there were 2 visionary elders who kept their people in peace and friendship for 54 years, this 54-year period. And in 1621, in the fall of 1621, they had a great harvest, and they had a 3-day harvest celebration with the Native Americans. And that 3-day celebration has come to be known as the first Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving was a traditional ceremony, but not a religious ceremony. It was a harvest celebration. It was a traditional thing in Holland, from where the English had come.
And in England, of course.
And in England.
And for the Native Americans.
And for the Native Americans.
We all celebrate a good harvest.
Yeah. So
and I just wanted to say something about the one. Connie, go back. Second one. Is it possible to go back? Yeah. the picture of the signing of the Wampanoag Treaty there in March of 1621. How on earth could a group of English people land on American soil, meet the Indians, and craft a treaty? Because they didn't speak the same language. One of the great miracles is that there was a man who has come down to us. His name is Squanto. We've heard of him. We've mostly heard that he taught the English how to plant corn. He had spent, it seems he may have spent as many as 6 years in England. And he liked the English. He spoke fluent English. And here he was to what's the word? To be the interpreter, to be the translator at this extraordinary ceremony. There was actually a Native American who spoke English. It always just boggles my mind. How could that have happened? Was there some kind of divine intervention?
Yeah, if we're looking at the high road and what some call the providential history, the eagle's perspective on the evolution of consciousness, we get a whole different perspective. So what we want to do is just go into a couple of details. And this expresses the essence of the Mayflower Compact. It's not the compact itself, that is a paragraph, but we thought we'd share this because some of the people who on the ship were thinking because they hadn't landed in Virginia where they had a patent, and they were in Massachusetts in New England where they didn't have a patent, some thought, well, we'll just go on our own. And here is the agreement to come together and sign this Mayflower Compact. This day, before we come to harbor, observing that some were not well affected to unity and conquered, but gave some appearance of faction, it was thought good that there should be an association and agreement so that we should combine together in one body and submit to such government and governors as we should by common consent agree to make and choose. We therefore set our hands to this that follows word for word. So you can look up the Mayflower Compact if you desire, but we want to keep moving along. But this is a promise. This Mayflower Compact is a promise, is a seed of what could be, what can be.
What did become.
What it did become, and we have yet to realize its true fruit as we've been in this process over this 400 years. So here we have this promise, the true American dream, which is in fact humanity's birthright. So here are seeds in the heart and spirit of humanity to have a society based on the consent of the governed, self-determination, separation of church and state, equal and just laws serving the common good, liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. And in God, Creator, Providence, we trust. So let's move on. So here is what the Pilgrims came upon when they landed in 1620 and what had been going on in New England prior to the arrival of the Mayflower.
You like me to do this part?
Yeah.
So I think it's just really interesting to look at the dates, the historical dates. We were just talking about the Scrooby Covenant, which was crafted among a group of people in Cambridge, England, and Scrooby, England, in the year 1606. So they'd been meeting since the late 1500s, and finally sort of crafted their agreement in 1606. At exactly the same time in what was to become New England, something entirely different was going on. So it's really interesting to look at that during that period of, say, 1607 to 1620. What was going on in New England before the Mayflower arrived? And this part of what launched me into the research I ended up doing, because honestly, you can't understand a situation in the moment it occurs unless you truly know what happened before. Where did those people come from? What did they believe? What were they looking for? What were their motivations? And who did they meet when they landed? And who were they? And where did they come from? And the same questions about them. So back in the late 1500s to the early 1600s, New England had a network of confederacies. We've all heard of the Iroquois Confederacy, which was a very powerful, ancient, even in those days, it was an ancient confederation of 6 tribes of previously warring communities who came together and united in what became the most powerful military alliance in North America. And they dominated the entire East Coast, the entire Northeast, including what is now Massachusetts Bay. So you had the Iroquois Confederacy as sort of the masterful overarching power. You had the Massachusetts Federation, now we've all heard of Massachusetts, but the Massachusetts were actually a tribe, they're still a tribe, and they were the dominant tribe in present-day Boston and that area. They were governed by a sachem, a leader named Nanapashamet, who got himself into big trouble by getting involved in a war that was breaking out up north. That's a big part of the story. So we had the Massachusetts Federation, which would have included everything in and around the Boston, present-day Massachusetts, Rhode Island area. And then you had the Wabanaki Federation, which was up north in present-day Maine, and others. So it was a cluster of ever-changing federations of Native Americans.
And I left out a comma. So Massachusetts, comma, Wabanaki.
Yeah, we needed
And more.
Right, so we got the 3, we just took them as examples of the 3 most powerful confederacies at the time. Then between 1607 and 1619, a conflict broke out, an intertribal conflict that is pretty much unknown. I literally have asked New England historians, tell me what you know about the Tarleton's War, and they look at me like, and they say like, what? And I said, oh, you haven't heard of it? Well, Google it, just Google it, there's a lot of information. It was up among the northern tribes, specifically the people today we call the Micmac, who were known as the Tarleton's at the time, and the Penobscot. And they were in competition over the trading rights for furs with the French. And typical humans, they fell at each other's throats, and major trouble erupted as a result of that. That changed history. It changed New England history, it changed American history. It would not, what unfolded would not have unfolded had it not been for this war, this forgotten or perhaps suppressed intertribal conflict. It's very interesting. Between the years 1616 and 1618, a lot of people know that there was a disease, a terrible plague or pandemic that occurred in New England that took out the larger part of the coastal peoples of Massachusetts, Maine and Massachusetts. An awful lot of people, as many as 90% as much as 90% of the population was exterminated in a disease. Now, most people think that disease was smallpox. Many people think it was brought by the Mayflower, except the Mayflower showed up 4 years later. That would be a trick that I wouldn't know how to do. And this whole thing about smallpox blankets is something I've studied deeply, and honestly, it's a hoax. It's not true. And most people believe it is, so that's going to be difficult. We're not going to try to change people's minds in that regard, but that's not what it was. And the disease was not smallpox. Turns out it was actually, I believe, bubonic plague, a certain form of plague that came over on a French fur trading vessel and got into the local natives who were at war with the people to the south. And the warriors in their birch bark canoes carried that disease to the south. And the plague, literally the same Black Death that occurred in Europe, occurred down the east coast of the United States. Not all the way down, just as far as Cape Cod.
So this was a pandemic that changed history. And Andrew's written a significant paper on that. tracking the vector of it all and how it came about. So that's part of, it's an appendix in the novel, the Mayflower Revelation. So I suggest
Mhm.
you get that novel from Amazon or write to us at trust@thetrustfrequency.net, and we'll send you a copy of his article.
And there's a very good account of it. It's called A Brief Narration. If you look at the third bullet point down there, there was a gentleman named Sir Ferdinando Gorges who wrote his memoir late in life, and this was published in London in 1658. And he called this disease pandemic a great and general plague. He did not call it the smallpox, two words smallpox. He called it a plague, and the English knew very well what the differences were. So it was plague that was spread by you can imagine now with this coronavirus thing, imagine hand-to-hand combat. What a wonderful way to spread a disease.
Yeah, right. Now we understand those things.
So here's a point that I've never seen expressed in anything other than our work. The historians don't seem ever to think about human emotions. But how did these Native Americans feel when the English encountered them? They'd just lost 90% of their tribal members. I think they were in a state of profound grief. And what happened to the Mayflower passengers when they landed, Connie?
Well, 102 passengers on the Mayflower. Of that 102, only 51 survived the first winter. They experienced scurvy and the effects of extremely cold temperatures. There was a kind of a mini ice age at that point in New England history, and unfamiliar organisms in the water took them out. Half of the people died that first winter. And who survived was 4 adult women, 14 adult men, and 34 children, ages 1 to 18, one of which was my ancestor, Priscilla Mullins, who was 16 or 17 at the time, who lost both her parents, my great-great-great-great-grandparents, and her brother. So she was an orphan at that time, as were many of these 34 children, with only 4 adult women left. And so that's who attended that first, what we call the first Thanksgiving, that 3-day celebration when 90 Native Americans came, and they had 3 days of intercultural celebration in the fall of 1621. And unfortunately, that's now been demonized, and all kinds of things are being said about the first Thanksgiving. But guess what? It was simply an intercultural celebration for 3 days. And we will show you the one paragraph that tells of that time. So here we have it, 2 cultures who are basically grieving, 2 cultures in extreme loss. And what grieving does is it gives birth to something higher. And we're experiencing that now with the pandemic, with the deaths that are happening in the pandemic. And once we understand the power of grief, the transformative power of grief, we will understand that how this pandemic is actually serving that evolution of consciousness right now through grief. And here we have these cultures in 1621 meeting each other in a state of grief.
Can you imagine these 2 grieving communities finding each other and having a celebration together? It's an extraordinary piece of human history.
Yeah, an extraordinary exception to the human condition occurred at the founding of this nation. And here we have, I will read this harvest celebration, this note that was published in Mort's Relation in 1622. In London. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent 4 men on fowling, that so we might after a special manner rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. They 4-in-1 killed as much fowl as, with a little help beside, served the company almost a week. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, which means they shot off their muskets, because they had to keep their muskets exercised so that they would work. And this was a traditional thing that the folks did back in those days. Many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted, and they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed on our governor and upon the captain and others. So here, this is the only explanation we have of that 3-day harvest celebration, which was attended by 52 of the Mayflower Pilgrims, the only surviving Mayflower Pilgrims. A baby had been born, so there were 52.
And about twice as many Indians.
And about twice as many Indians. The next ship to come, which was the Fortune, came after this harvest celebration. So here, if you can just picture these 52 people, these grieving people from the people they had lost, and these Native Americans coming together with a wonderful celebration of a harvest.
Having had a very successful first harvest.
Yeah,
Amazing.
thanks to Squanto.
Plus they built this little, was starting building their town. They were building homes, they were cutting down trees and building houses and planting, and
Yeah,
successfully in
And
the year of 1621.
after having signed this treaty with the Massasoit, this mutual protection treaty that lasted this 54 years. And Squanto teaching them how to plant Indian corn, because they had never experienced Indian corn over in England. So it was a mutually beneficial relationship that was being celebrated at this time. So here we have what is called Aspects of the Plymouth Paradigm by Betty Booth Donahue, who's a PhD Cherokee and author of Bradford's Indian Book. She tracks the effects of the Native American thought processes on the English. And Governor Bradford wrote the first piece of American literature, which was his document of this whole experience called Of Plymouth Plantation. And here's what Betty has to say. We actually interviewed her for our film, and you can hear her on our film called Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America. That's on our website, first50years.us. You can access our film there. And here's what Betty had to say. And I just had a chat with her yesterday, and she would love to have come on this with us, but she's just had a hip replacement.
She's out in Oklahoma, right?
She's in Oklahoma and has been having some health challenges. So here's what she has to say. Pilgrims and natives were as much alike as they were different. Both groups were highly religious, and they understood the power of the spoken word. The Pilgrims did not arrive with the idea of taking land from the natives. They wanted to buy it and did. In fact, there was a very complex process by which land changed hands in early New England, and it's very well documented in a book called Indian Deeds by Jeremy Bangs. So they lived in close proximity to each other. Indians lived inside the stockade and came and went at will. And that's being shown now through archaeological digs, that this relationship was in fact very real. And in fact, Plymouth Plantation is now changing their whole structure to show the interconnectedness and relationship of the Pilgrims and the Indians during those early years. So here's Betty. They visited with each other, exchanged ideas and information and goods, and understood each other. Pilgrims viewed the natives as sentient human beings and valued their opinions as much as they feared their savagery. There was mutual respect. And I would just have to say that I think we've all cultures have exhibited savagery. So it's not anything that's unique for any one culture or race to exhibit. And here is her last point. Had other colonies followed Plymouth, things would have been very different for natives and whites. Much suffering and loss of life and culture would have been avoided. So she makes this point of the Plymouth paradigm, that if it had continued, we would have evolved at maybe a faster rate than what did transpire, but everything has a purpose, as we've discussed. So let's see, why isn't it moving? Let's see, we got to move this thing along, and it's not moving.
Trying to change the slide here, and it's not doing it.
So what do we do about that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Okay, so here we have a little clip that is a quote from Edward Winslow, speaking of peace and friendship. He wrote this in Mort's Relation in 1622. So we'll
And
just,
we filmed this in Plymouth how long ago?
yeah.
5 or 6 years
We
ago.
have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them, and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. Not only the greatest king amongst them, called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us, have either made suit unto us, or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us, so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end. So that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we for our parts walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly bestowing their venison on us.
So that's a direct quote from the journal of Edward
We have
Winslow.
found the
Oops,
Indians
hold
very
on.
faithful in their
No, we want to move on. Okay, so in that you saw and heard that there was in fact peace and friendship and mutual exchange and going amongst homes and sharing food. So that leads automatically to a synthesis, to a shift in both cultures, in how we think, how we see things. And so here we have the second great synthesis, when the great law of the Iroquois influences the Constitution of the United States. And here we have a picture, a drawing of Ben Franklin with the Iroquois elders. Ben spent a lot of time with the Iroquois. His first assignment was to make a treaty with the Iroquois, and he had great respect for the Native Americans. And in fact, he was actually called the philosopher as savage, because due to his combining indigenous American thinking with European philosophy. So I've just discovered that in a new article. So there was just so much respect for the Native people. And there was also the shadow side was going on as well, amongst the Indians, amongst the whites. So as we can see right now, we have people that are looking for peace, looking for justice, looking for the high road and standing up for that. Well, that's what was happening in the founding of this nation. And as we see right now, there's also that shadow piece, those parts of us that are in a lower frequency. So that was happening at the founding of this nation. So as I've said, we are taking that high road of looking at the light and tracking the light, and so that we can be inspired to move into the light and into our hearts at this time. So here's another drawing of the Iroquois at the Continental Convention. These are wonderful drawings that are done by, I can't remember, Mr. Fadden, I believe, who I've been in relationship with these drawings for many decades.
Let us use the drawings.
Lets us use these
And
drawings.
this would be 1787, I think.
1787.
Right. So we
So-
moved from 1620, 1621 to 1787.
And how the Iroquois Confederacy came about is a very inspiring story and a very important story for right now. And that story is that these warring tribes of the Iroquois, they had been at war with each other for maybe millennia, but
Generations.
many, many generations. There
Mhm.
was utter hatred amongst these tribes up in upstate New York, what we call upstate New York now. And this visionary peacemaker came amongst them. What I call a Jesus figure came amongst them. And he had trouble convincing them that there was another way of being and seeing and doing things, until a sort of miracle happened when they said, oh my goodness, yes indeedy, this man has come from the Creator. We'd better listen up. And Hiawatha became his spokesman because the peacemaker stuttered, and Hiawatha had a great transformation. He was one of the angriest of the people and had a great transformation because he had lost his whole family in one of these wars. But meanwhile, this peacemaker came to the Iroquois and brought what is called the Great Binding Law. And this law, and that's what's important about this, is that it brought a higher way of thinking. Okay? So people moved from one level of thinking, one level of consciousness, into a higher level of consciousness where they could see that coming together was much more productive, much more in alignment with their true nature and what they were ready for. They were tired of war and they were ready for something else. And here comes this peacemaker, the Daganowida, bringing this wonderful, great law. And we'll go into that just a bit. Did you have anything you wanted to say, or shall I
you're
go
doing
on?
Great, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the peacemaker unveiled a new form of government, a participatory democracy. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound somewhat like the Mayflower Compact? We shall form ourselves into a civil body politic and enable and enact equal and just laws serving the common good. Okay, with who we shall choose, with governors that we shall choose, this participatory democracy, and a legal system called the Great Law of Peace. So this was in the 1200s. So this was about the same time in England that the Magna Carta came forth, was the first movement of democracy in the monarchical system in England. So here we have the great peacemaker coming, and the core teaching of the great law is that peace was the law, and the law was for peace. And under the great law, 50 chiefs and clan mothers were organized in a three-part system of government with executive, legislative, and judicial divisions.
That
So-
rings a bell. Where did I
Yeah,
get that?
rings a bell. So Ben Franklin saw this and understood it and saw and put it into his Albany plan in 1754. The Albany plan didn't get accepted, but it became a foundational concept for the evolution of the Constitution. So here are the three branches of government. We'll just read through this quickly. The Onondaga Nation became like the executive branch. The legislative branch was formed when the Mohawk and Seneca were organized like the U.S. Senate, and the Oneida and Cayuga later joined by the Tuscarora, formed a sort of U.S. House of Representatives. So this gives you a feeling for what was going on and how that great law organized these tribes and how it looks like the United States government at this time. Now, here's an interesting point. The judicial branch of government was turned over to the clan mothers. Thus, the women gained veto power over war and the power to nominate the chiefs. Because if a chief did not serve the people, if the chief went into ego, if the chief was just not doing his job as the clan mothers saw fit for the people, they could pull that chief and recommend another one, nominate another one.
That sounds like a good idea.
So this was the part that was left out of the evolution of the U.S. government. And now, as we see women coming forth, we're seeing it coming into the women coming into power now through this process of us moving along on this evolutionary upward spiral. It's all served and it's all serving now to take us to new levels. So here we go. Here's Chief Oren Lyons, a quote from Chief Oren Lyons. Our Iroquois perception, in our Iroquois perception, all life is equal, and that includes the birds, animals, things that grow, things that swim. All life is equal in our perception. So we're going to move along into this Indigenous worldview. And here we have a beautiful picture exemplifying the Indigenous worldview. And we're going to give the attributes of this Indigenous worldview that Oren Lyons suggests and that I experienced with these visionary elders who came into my life in the 90s and were in my life for many, many years. And here is the Indigenous worldview.
Respect and reverence for all of life, interrelatedness of all things and actions, co-creative power of thought, concern for future aspects of present action, living in balance, concern for common good.
So here we have several aspects of the Indigenous worldview, and we have some more here that are trust in a higher power, incorporation of metaphysical into physical reality. This is key, because as we go into this evolutionary leap in consciousness, we're going to see and experience this incorporation of metaphysical into physical reality. That's what's up from my perspective, and that's what's up with present day science. It's bringing understanding of the metaphysical so we can incorporate it into physical reality. And then it's equality of all aspects of life, not just equality of men and women of different races, equality of all aspects of life. That's a big deal. Then the sharing. And in the native way, the giveaway is the essence of abundance, the giveaway. You don't hoard, you give away. And I just heard somebody recently, a native man from Alaska, who said they never planned for the next day in their culture. This is the epitome of total trust, that they all were well fed, well cared for, and totally thriving on the shores of the ocean,
The Arctic Ocean.
the Arctic Ocean, and they never planned for the next day.
That's amazing.
Okay, this is key, and that he's right here, right now, sharing that knowledge and that knowing and that experience. And then the last one is cooperation. So when you have all these aspects, cooperation is a given. So that's the Indigenous worldview. And what we want to do is share with you Wallace Black Elk, one of the great Lakota elders who came into my life and through whom I saw this reality. And here's our friend Sally Ranney introducing, this is a little interview that Sally did with Wallace and me in Aspen, Colorado in the 90s. And so enjoy. This is a short little clip. Oops.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
That's
Let's see. How do we get them going?
down here. There it
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Today we are honored to have with us Wallace Black Elk.
Hello, Mitakuyasin. Tell my relations that I thank you to each and everyone here on the television world. And it's about time we all come to focus our mind universally, because I speak from the universal mind. And the way we're born with love, kindness, generosity, and giving. So we're born with love. So the love in itself is God, and love is mother. So mother is love, and God is love, and so on. So I think this is the way we should teach our children.
So there you have Grandfather Wallace speaking of love. God is love. So we want to move along with that concept. And oops, I moved it backwards. Now I'll move it
There
forward.
you go.
So we want to move forward into,
Are we ready
are we ready?
for the third great
Great
synthesis
synthesis.
as we move in the direction of I like to call it humanity 2.0, the next iteration of our species.
Yay, that's what's
Mm.
up. We've got a cheering squad here. Yay, yay.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you. Yeah, friends. Here we go. Humanity 2.0, the evolutionary leap. We're just right now catalyzing with,
Yeah,
with
there we go.
World Unity Week right now.
Yeah.
So,
So these are some words that I put together. When was this? This was quite a while back. Yeah. So humanity 2.0, what could that mean? Well, the fully evolved human manifests the best features of all previous cultures. We are part of nature, not above it. We're aware of the scientific perspective, yet not ruled by it. We're tuned into a higher reality, yet fully present in the world. A synthesis occurs, which brings forth something that has never been on the planet before.
yes. So, humanity. Go for it.
Quantum
Science
reality.
guy.
Yeah.
Andrew's the science guy of this whole
Oh,
thing.
thank you. Quantum reality illuminates and informs the Western paradigm, expands our understanding of the nature of the universe, which allows us to align with the Indigenous worldview, a synthesis of cutting-edge science and ancient Indigenous wisdom. That is our species heritage.
And what we have to know and understand is it's not just ancient wisdom, it is being carried by the native people at this time.
To this day.
To this
absolutely.
day. And they're coming forward now because they've been waiting for this time in our evolution when we could hear, we would have the ears to hear and the eyes to see what they've been carrying for us all as we walk into our hearts and into the sacredness and oneness of all life. So, what modern science has brought us, what quantum science has brought us is quantum entanglement.
The fact that we are profoundly interconnected. There's no possible way we can disconnect from one another. Somehow we're brought into the illusion of separation, and yet science is proving, and ancient wisdom has always known, that we are deeply, profoundly interconnected.
And we're not only interconnected, we are one.
There's that whole
How about that? But this is
unity
quantum.
consciousness. There's an enormous emergence I am seeing, that we are seeing, of this whole idea of oneness, of non-duality, of unity, and movements such as Unity Earth, this world, what's it called? World Unity Week.
Yeah,
Good
that's
heavens.
it.
I mean, really.
So
Unify.
to unify.
It's
So
amazing.
what we coming to understand through modern science is that we're not just interconnected. We are one consciousness. We are aspects of one consciousness. We're roving sensory organs of the divine, reporting back to headquarters what it's like to feel fear, separation, scarcity,
And love and all the good stuff as well.
love and all the
Oh,
good
yeah.
stuff, and transmute those lower frequency aspects for all of creation. It's like we've had a job to do this job of experiencing separation, fear, scarcity, thinking, lower frequency, and bring it through the physical and transmute it and choose to open our hearts and walk in oneness and alignment with all of creation. And the very important observer effect.
So the other thing that we learn from quantum science and unified physics as it emerges is this phenomenon that was discovered about 100 years ago called the observer effect. And what it ultimately means is that we, as an observer, bring reality into manifestation. It's extraordinary. It means literally that we participate in creation. We co-create reality with the power of our consciousness. And science proves that, and spiritual people have known that forever.
So we have to understand just how powerful we are in creating reality, our own individual reality and the collective reality. Once we get that, the physics of it, we will change everything. Once we understand how we influence our reality and the collective reality, and that's what we're bringing with this process. And so we have the understanding that everything is love. From Grandfather Blackout, we have this understanding that God is love and that God is everything. So we also have the understanding from quantum science and unified physics that it's a conscious universe. Jude Currivan is doing a lot of work with the conscious universe and her whole worldview, physics and metaphysics combination. And so we're bringing in, and through Wallace and through our own knowing, that it's not only a conscious universe, it's a loving universe.
It's a conscious, loving universe. And we have never heard anybody else ever use that phrase.
And we have an ebook coming out shortly called The Conscious Loving Universe, a guidebook, which is in essence our trust frequency book. Our trust frequency 10 assumptions for a new paradigm book that brings a toolkit for understanding how loved we are by a conscious, loving universe. And one thing we have to come to understand is that everything is vibration, everything is frequency. Do you have anything to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, what can one say? It just is.
It just is.
Everything is vibrational frequency. And we have the ability to change our vibration, to change our frequency. We all know the difference between being in a bad mood and being in a good mood. Those are differences of vibration, differences of frequency. Life is different when I'm in a good mood or when I'm joyful or in love than I am when I'm in a bad mood or when I'm depressed or when I'm anxious. We are, here's an interesting way of putting it. What are humans? We are conscious electromagnetic loving beings in a conscious electromagnetic loving abundant universe. So absorb that one, my friends. And we can choose our frequency, which allows us to actually choose the reality we experience. We can actually modify the frequency we vibrate at. If we find ourselves in a certain state of consciousness, we can change that. Meditation is a good way to move in that direction. Just being positive and open-hearted and loving are huge steps in that direction. And here's something that I'd never heard before, and I have a lot of science education behind me. And it's this. Connie, would you read that last line there, because it came from you?
The laws in the different frequencies are different. Okay, the laws are expanded as we move up in frequency, as we shift frequencies. The laws are expanded, and the earth is moving into a higher frequency. So it's a new ball game we're going to be playing there by new rules. And we have to do our own individual work, our inner work, to cleanse ourselves of fear, scarcity, separation, our shadow pieces that we came here to learn to transcend and to transmute into our own self-love and alignment with our divinity. We actually have a course on this subject called The Dance of Souls, and it's on a website called Social Chrysalis. And if anybody wants to do some personal work on the learning how the loving universe is taking us on our journey to wholeness and dealing with our shadow, those parts of ourselves we don't love yet, that we came to learn to love. Anyway, that's another subject. And so,
This is
Henry.
David Thoreau.
Okay, how I figured out that the laws were expanded in the higher frequencies is this quote from Henry David Thoreau. And we do a lot of work with Henry as the mystic. And we lecture and speak at the Thoreau Society regularly, bringing forth the mystical Thoreau. And here is the conclusion to Walden, where he says, I learned this, at least, by my experiment, his 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days that he spent at Walden Pond, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary, new, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him, or the old laws will be expanded and interpreted in his favor in a more liberal sense, and he will live with the license of a higher order of beings. So, folks, that's what's up right now. As we move into this higher frequency and we choose to align ourselves with those new universal and more liberal laws, we become a higher order of beings. And Barbara Marx Hubbard saw this as a new species. Humanity, what did she call it?
Homo universalis.
Homo amore universalis.
All right.
She saw a new species. Barbara was a very close friend of ours. And we had come together because we resonate to this future of humanity. So please take this in and know that as you walk confidently in the direction of your dreams, meaning you trust a loving universe, you will shift your frequency where there are higher laws that apply to you, to us. We can do this thing, but what it takes is trust, moving confidently in the direction of our dreams. So here we go. And here's Wallace again saying, come together in trust. So grandfather.
It is the doubt that has created the reality that we live in now, and it has we're unable to understand other realities that and the knowings that you have about the real nature of the universe. It's this doubt that has been the problem from the beginning.
Yes, it was told that pollution begins in the mind. For having a doubt against a creature, so first, second, or third, that doubt will visit you. So we're in the third generation, and so we could see that doubt is here. So that doubt goes around in the universe of mind. Then what it does, it casts shadow of fear. So everything turned wild.
Because we have choice, is it too late to change the course?
No, we got one more to go yet. Remember, 4 times. And the 4th time, I'm going to come back and I'm going to check up on you guys. So we got a little ways to go yet. So we already passed 3 and we got 1 more to go. So we still have little time left. So that's why we're here. We're going to take every split second and to tell each other that we should all come back together. We still have that chance. So we have to come back and try to understand the fire, the rock, the water, and green. Then once we all understand, it has to be unanimous. Now we're going to escape from our own self-destruction. So the whole world will turn green again, and we could live here forever. We have to stop abusing. Then for doing so, they say if we put that fire back, they say as soon as you touch the earth, there'll be a flash of light and canopy the whole universe, and all the sickness that are incurable will be destroyed, not people. And even our dead will rise, resurrect from death. So it will be total victory. So it is possible that we could regain what we lost. This is where we were told every step you take is a prayer. You have to live with it, walk with it, not just say a bunch of Americans walk across the street and back to Beer Johnson, play golf and win a roast marshmallow. It's not that way. You have to live, walk with it. Your life.
Yeah.
You have to walk because Tagasta is watching you. And with this power, that will is in you. That Chanumpa is you.
So there you have it from Grandfather Wallace Blackout. He said, man has doubted the Creator, and that man has doubted the Creator from the beginning, and that doubt has plagued him. He was a very close friend of mine for decades, and I call him a walking phenomenon for who he was, what he saw, what he was desperate to share with humanity during his lifetime. So I was very blessed. Oops.
It is the doubt.
Okay, that one. So here we have, in the conscious loving universe we trust, we are one, right there on our dollar bill. So if we look for the hidden messages of what this nation is about and where we're headed, if we can do this, once we do this, we walk in trust and we understand our oneness, we will realize the American dream of liberty, justice, equality, and freedom. And
it's right on the
that's
dollar
right
bill.
on the dollar bill for
That's
all,
what
abundance for
I
all.
always thought it meant $1, but it means one humanity.
One humanity, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
So in this frequency of trust, trust replaces fear, ease replaces struggle, generosity replaces hoarding, abundance replaces scarcity, unity replaces separation, new systems develop, New relationships replace outmoded ways of being. An understanding of the interconnectedness and sacredness of all things emerges. And it is in this way that true peace and profound freedom, not the freedom we think we've gotten right now, but the freedom that the indigenous peoples carry and know in the heart and the essence of their cosmology and way of life. This will come to prevail on earth. But let me say that none of us have gotten there yet. The Native Americans carry that in their heart for all of us, but it's not until we all come together that we bring this new way of being on the planet that has never been here. Let me say that we've all been influenced by a lower energetic frequency, and all races have been doing pretty nasty stuff to each other throughout the millennia. And so this is a new time, a new earth that we're giving birth to. And we're not going back to anything. We're going forward into this evolutionary leap of
This is the third great synthesis?
the third great synthesis.
Aha.
And anybody who's watching this is probably out there in Zoom land seeing it happen now, right now, with World Unity Week, and also just with all the Zoom that's going on, the Zoom calls that I'm a part of with Good of the Whole connection field. And anybody can access that if one goes to goodofthewhole.org and gets on the connection field. You can come in contact with the visionary elders and Native people, youth, and beyond, and all people that are ready to walk forth into a reality that we don't even know what it is, because it's emergent. It's coming through from the higher frequency that the earth is in now. So here we have the evolutionary leap to a higher way of seeing, to trust, to oneness, the open heart, choosing to walk in trust, and realizing the true American dream, which is liberty, justice, equality, and abundance for all. It's our birthright. And this is a quote from our film, Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America, which is available on our website, first50years.us. And this quote is from me, and it says, once we recognize the role of the American Indian in the evolution of the United States of America, the dream for humanity carried to these shores by the early settlers of New England and Virginia will be realized. That we lead the world as exemplars in liberty, justice, and equality. Until that time, the United States, like a three-legged stool, missing one of its legs, is out of balance without the Native American at the table. And let me just say that this film and this work has to do with the role of the Native Americans in the evolution of the United States and the American dream. But the Black people, the yellow people, those people who have played key roles in the evolution of this psyche, of this nation, need to be recognized and brought to the table. And it's not until all four colors of man come together that we will be able to see this jigsaw puzzle with all its pieces put together. And we're going to see a picture that's never been seen before, but we can't see it when there are missing pieces. So let's bring all of our voices together and piece this jigsaw puzzle together. And this is how it started here in the United States, in Plymouth in 1621, with the meeting of Massasoit and the Mayflower Pilgrims and signing that first treaty that, in fact, lasted 54 years. So
It is time to move forward.
Mhm.
It is time
What?
to take the inspiration
Good
of the
heavens.
intercultural
I guess
syntheses
it's
a
of the
film.
first 50
I guess it's a
years
film.
of peace and friendship modeled by Plymouth Colony and the melding of the great law of the Iroquois into the Constitution to the next level. It is time to respect, honor, and understand the American Indian point of view and way of life. It is time to welcome the visionary Indian to the table through an open-hearted and open-minded invitation to sit in council together and explore how we are going to realize the principles and ideals so treasured by the founders of this nation, the American Indian, and by all people who dream of bringing universal liberty, equality, and justice from the realm of possibility into actualization. It is time for a third great synthesis.
I believe that if the Indians and the white man would sit down and talk, it would be a much better world.
It has to come from the heart, from the spirit, from the mind of people of conscience.
There's only one creator, which is leading us all. And that's what makes us all one.
When that reconciliation catches fire, it will jump the oceans.
We do have to take care of Mother Earth and clean up our ways and respect one another and love one another. That's all it takes.
See the day, because it starts with you and it starts with me, and it has begun this moment, and nothing will stop it, because this sacred spirit fire wants to heal the entire human race, and it shall be done.
and it shall be done.
So be it.
It is time
Oops.
to move forward. It is
Oops. So we are one
In the year 2020.
in the year 2020.
Oh,
And
yeah.
here we go. Here we're
And
going to
we'll-
conclude.
We'll end with a message from two of the most ancient cultures on the planet, the Australian Aborigines, who say this: we are all visitors to this time, this place. We are just passing through. Our purpose here is to observe, to learn, to grow, to love, and then we return home.
How about that beautiful face and that knowing? And here we have Andrew's favorite people, the Kalahari Bushmen.
I had the privilege of taking Connie to the Kalahari back in 2004 and introducing her to these people. And this is just one of many beautiful sayings or statements from them. Listen to this and take it to heart. Open your hearts to others. When you do so, you will feel our spirit. It will make you dance and it will make you happy. And then you too will be a Bushman.
And I have to say that my experience with the Bushmen, I've never been so loved on as I have by those people, those beautiful, beautiful people. And so thank you for taking me there and introducing me. And we have a film, another film called In Search of the Future, What Do the Wise Ones Know? And if you go to insearchofthefuturemovie.com, you can watch our film that opens in the Kalahari, and it's with visionary elders, scientists, and futurists on the origin and future of humanity. So, and if you want links to, well, I'll talk about that, but let's finish this, and we've got a few more minutes. So here we are, the beginning. Yay!
This is not the end. This
It's
is
not the end, it's the
The
beginning.
beginning
Yay!
of the third great
The
synthesis.
beginning of the third great synthesis. So now we'll stop sharing
Let's
our
stop sharing.
screen.
We have a little time and
We have
can
some
open
time,
it
we
up.
can open it
Let's
up for
communicate.
stop share. Okay, let's go. All right, kids, who's here that wants to chip in and say hello? We've noticed some cheering from Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, exactly. It is just the beginning. I'm reminded of the Bob Marley tune. the lyrics go. You think it's the end, but it's just the beginning.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Bob Marley's one of our great, great wisdom keepers.
Absolutely.
So anybody else have any thoughts? We thank you for coming, and we really enjoyed our time here with you and appreciate your cheers here and there.
I think Rita has
Rita
something
and
to
Marsh
contribute.
has
Hello,
something
Rita.
to say.
A fabulous presentation.
Oh, good.
I'm just so proud of the two of you.
Oh,
And this is, I would say, the fourth synthesis. All the work that you've done over all these years has come together.
Yeah, well, we trusted the loving universe that there would become a time when there would be ears to hear and hearts open to receiving and moving forward. And wow, what's up now is so
Look,
exciting.
I recommend the book.
And, and here you are, yes.
We are.
There's our book, The
Yeah.
Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm. And people say that it's a simple construct on the nature of the universe that people can take in and really live by. That it's a simple, concise construct on the conscious, loving, abundant nature of the universe. A toolkit for walking into this new world.
And there's some really nice Bob Marley quotes in there.
There's
Oh, yeah. We take our
Good.
wisdom where we find it. And this one thing that book is a collection of beautiful, beautiful quotes from countless sources, including Bob Marley. The Rolling Stones are in there.
And you can email us at trust@thetrustfrequency.net. If you'd like our links, we'll send you links to our films and workshops and all kinds of cool information in one email. We'll put you on our list if that's okay, but we don't send out much. But I'll send you one email with lots of links. Anybody else have any thoughts? Because we have a few more minutes.
Yes.
Suzanne.
Yeah, because I'm located just above the medicine line. I'm sorry, I was late into hearing everything you had to say. I came at the second synthesis because I was in another circle. I was supposed to be facilitating a talking circle on racism.
Oh, great.
But nevertheless, I had it in my mind that I had to attend whatever I could of your talk. So because I'm on the medicine line, we have Canada and so-called Canada and so-called United States compromise or creating something called Turtle Island. So what are you doing working across the border into Canada? Because I'm looking at what you're saying about the American democracy and this, that. How does that play out?
Well, from my perspective, Turtle Island is the island of peace. And the land that is the Americas has something to bring to this party as we learn to listen to the land. And I guess.
And the artificial lines that people, colonial folks came and drew these lines, you can fly over, you look down, you don't see the lines, they're not there. So this is another part of the illusion of separation. So here it is for now, whatever it is, I believe eventually all of these lines and distinctions and separations are going to dissolve and we can just let them go. We don't need them.
But the indigenous peoples of the Americas are the players that we're speaking of, that heart, that spirit, that knowledge. There's something that they're bringing to the party that's unique.
And the Canadian,
Absolutely.
And the Canadian Native Americans especially.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah, go on.
So I spent the last 2 years working on a personal project called the 2-row flow cultural commons. So of course I'm referencing the 2-row wampum, which took place in Upper New York, but then of course moved further into so-called Canada, right? As one of the grandfather of the treaties, because of the relationship with the Haudenosaunee, the Mohawk, the Iroquois, and then Canada was initially just that little piece of land, just that little above whatever Upper New York was. And then it spread out to the west. So we're really tied in to America with respect to that treaty. So my take obviously is that we need to study those original treaties. And I focused on that framework because the chiefs, and again, I reference this to your little pictures, you said, and this is Chief or so-and-so, he had a nice, beautiful name. And then these are some settlers from the pilgrims. It's always interesting how we are not represented by any kind of leaders in terms of names. There's just like Indian agents, and then you actually have a real leader representing the people, and you have to scratch your head. Well, obviously that's where it went wrong, because you just had stand-in agents for the monarch in wherever, right? It wasn't really authentic. It wasn't even from the heart and the mind at that point. So anyhow, those chiefs said, we're moving together down the river, and if we want, peace, respect, and friendship, we need to learn each other's laws and customs and ways. So that's the focus of the cultural commons that I'm trying to work on. And
Yes.
yeah, the continuation and the nonstop learning, self-education, particularly for settlers, of what those laws and customs and ways are that we should have known about from the beginning if our so-called leaders would have honored the treaties, right? So,
Well, we suggest you listen to our whole presentation with this first great synthesis and the second synthesis, because a lot of that did go on a spiritual level. And so you're involved with the two-row. So do you know our friends Andai Ferran and do you know those folks, Andrea? Are you?
No, I'd actually love to meet more people like yourself and others who are involved like intimately with this whole, Indigenous thinking and ways and the treaties. I actually came to this through, I work in some tech circles. A man there recommended that I hook up with Chief Phil. And about a year ago, we had a conversation, but it was all about tech. And he was going his way and I was going my way, and that was it. And then all of a sudden, about a month or two ago, all of a sudden I got an email. Hey, we're doing these talking circle facilitation things. And that's where I jumped in. And that's what brought me here today.
Well,
So,
listen, email me, because we have some friends that are very involved with the two-row in New England and paddle the rivers and do all this stuff. So
and we have a Mohawk peacemaker in Canada.
Kevin Deere, do you know Kevin Deere?
No, I'm not familiar.
Anyway,
So
yeah.
he's a good man. You like each other.
Yeah. Where are you in Canada?
Blackfoot territory, just above the medicine line on the Canadian side, Alberta. So on the other side of the Rockies.
Do you know Leroy Little Bear?
I have heard him speak, and I have met his wife, Amethyst.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, I think Phil is a great contact.
Connie's known Phil for how long?
I've known Phil for decades, but he'll be your pathway in once he knows, gets you beyond your tech. Okay.
Okay.
So,
all right.
But really, pursue it with him and Four Worlds International and the good of the whole connection field. Susan.
Yeah, well, I will send you an email. So you said trust at the trust frequency. What was the end of it?
.net.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
.net. Yeah, and I'll because the good of the whole connection field, you really hook up with Indigenous people from around the world. Actually.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Yes. Thanks for coming, and do listen to our recording, because we have recorded this and we'll put it on YouTube, and we'll get it World Unity Week. It'll be available, and I'll send you a link to it if I have your email.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, Marlene, how are you?
Hi, I'm in love with you two. I'm just in love with you. I always like anything that softens my heart. And I've had some resistance and hard energies around our history in America. I always said we were founded on genocide and built on slavery. And yet I know that humanity is always in a state of greater becoming. I know that. And it is a loving universe. I've experienced that powerfully firsthand. But this today was so personally valuable for me. So I'm just so grateful for the work each of you have done. It's so important. You've transformed my understanding of American history, and I nearly could weep with how precious it is.
Yeah.
I did want to share when you shared the Thoreau quote. I have a quote by Patanjali, the 4th, 5th century sage who is Patanjali.
Patanjali. Indian.
Yes.
Do you want
He
to?
has, can you hear me okay? I won't
It's
speak. If
breaking
I
up.
Breaking up a bit, so just take your time.
He has a lovely quote, which I will say slowly, so that I don't, if it breaks up, you still hear me. It actually, I keep it on all of my emails as a signature quote. And it says, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant faculties become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And I think this speaks so powerfully to what you were saying about the higher levels of frequency and what is happening really with humanity. We are evolving and expanding. And when we know, those of us who followed, had a great purpose, a great passion, we experienced exactly that math, right? We've experienced it firsthand. So I love that you included that again. I just am so grateful to have been in the audience today. You're really lovely.
Oh, thank you, because we've been at this so long. And let me tell you, that resistance that you felt is very real. And we've been waiting, and see this pandemic, we just waiting for when the time is right. We've been at it for decades, shouting this from the rooftops. But there's a resistance to it in the victim perpetrator energy, and this shame and guilt and blame, all that energy. We can't open our hearts and move forward in that lower energy. And this pandemic has just shifted everything. So thank you so much for honoring us. That means so much to us.
And please stay in touch.
Yeah, please send that quote. Did you get our email?
I will.
That quote is a beautiful quote.
I'll find your email on your card. Yes, your email's on your card.
Yeah, on the World
Or
Unity.
trust@thetrustfrequency.net will get to us.
Okay,
Yeah.
lovely.
And so, yeah, it's so exciting, and thank you, and for being here and honoring us in that way. And Rita for her long-term, decade-long support of us, because she hears it and resonates, and because of her that our book actually exists, our Trust Frequency book. She said, do it.
She encouraged us every step of the way.
And now she wants a course, and so we're just waiting. We're trusting that the coming time.
We're not exactly sitting and waiting.
We're not sitting. Spirit has us doing lots of creating content, like Andrew writing this novel. We thought 2020 was going to be the time for this novel, but guess what? 2020 is the time of cleansing. 2020 is the time of getting ready for what's in this novel, of the peace and friendship that occurred. Because you can't, out of victim and perpetrator, you can't come into synthesis and peace and friendship and stuff. So, and the trust frequency, just because of what we do with the trust frequency, we move beyond good and evil, beyond right and wrong. That is a huge leap.
Yes.
Saying it is all love. And we resolve that paradox because we know that everything has a purpose, and also when we understand the nature of that love, it's unconditional. It gives us what we need for this journey and what we ask for from our deepest levels. And we didn't even put in the 7 A's. So here's the 7 A's of consciousness that create our vibratory level. We have to put that in. That create our vibratory level. Therefore, our frequency, therefore, our reality. Here they are in one sentence. With expanded awareness and accurate assumptions. We choose our attitude, consciously direct our attention, align with our highest inner promptings, take committed action, and allow the loving universe to manifest beyond our wildest dreams. So we can check those 7 A's any time of the day or night. What are we doing with these 7 A's of our consciousness? And then we can walk into that higher frequency, that trust frequency, and the magic and abundance that lives there. So,
Beautiful.
yes, Rita.
Yes, Rita.
Something just came through to me that what you have created here is a vaccine for the soul to bring us out of fear.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. You become immune to fear. If you're in trust and fear cannot coexist.
That's right. Yes.
That word has so much baggage now. I would never dare say that.
That's a good one. I like it.
Oh man. So
That
what a
would-
treat.
It
So
would
here we are.
flip-
We're at the top of the hour.
It would flip people.
Yeah. So we look forward to hearing from you too that we don't know. And we'd love to
Then we
send you
know
our
now.
links.
We
and-
just spent 2 hours.
Yeah.
yeah, we just spent 2 hours together,
Yeah.
more or less. And so we're gonna get shut down, I think, because they start their open space, I think, starts now. Is that
Thanks,
right?
Marlene.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Connect by
Suzanne.
email.
We'll see you on the rest
Nice
of
to
the
see you again, Rita.
Yes.
I'm doing a
Yeah.
My parenting
climate,
too.
I'm doing a climate presentation